This video will explain how Jordan Peterson's strategy to free others from the mind virus of our time ensured he would catch the disease he fought so hard against. The opening lines of his YouTube channel hint at the nature of that strategy.
I'm not an atheist anymore because I don't look at the world that way anymore. I'm not a materialist anymore. I don't think the world's made out of matter. I think it's made out of what matters.
It was Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, who sparked this change in Peterson. What Jung did for Peterson, Peterson devoted his life to do for others. But there was a problem.
There's another problem with this kind of material. It's like Jung called that the process of coming to terms with this material a circumambulation, a continual wandering around a center, and you sort of specify the center by almost by inference. So it's one of the things that make Jung very difficult to read, because everything that he says is dependent on all the other things he said. That's one of the problems I ran into when I was writing Maps of Meaning too. It's like there's a presupposition at the bottom that you have to accept in order to follow the logic, and the presupposition is there are alternative ways of laying out your initial presuppositions about the nature of reality. It's like, well, why should I accept that? Well, I can't show you why till you accept it because I can't walk you through the argument. It's a paradigm problem, fundamentally.
Without solving this paradigm problem, Peterson argues, it's inevitable that once again people will turn
in large numbers to mass movements that were in every way a substitute, a more rational, in some sense, substitute for religious beliefs that appeared no longer tenable. And the consequence of that was, it was just about annihilation, because we came close to annihilation twice, once in the 60s and once in the 80s. And even without the totality of annihilation, we lost hundreds of millions of people as a consequence of pathological belief systems in the 20th century. So, if belief systems become pathological, that pathology can pose the biggest threat possibly to our very existence. And if you're a Darwinian in any sense, you have to understand that the things that pose the biggest threats to your survival are the most real things. They have to be dealt with.
Jordan dealt with this dilemma by continuing what Jung started by talking to his imagination.
Those figures of imagination are the distillations of patterns of behavior. And so, as the distillations of patterns of behavior, they have content. And it's not you, that content. You could even think about it as content that's evolved, although it's culturally transmitted. It's content that's evolved. And so these figures of the imagination can reveal the structure of reality to you. And that's what happened with Jung, and that's what he described in the Red Book.
Jordan believes that a proper understanding of this reality that's revealed by these figures of the imagination would solve the paradigm issue, which would free us from our modern sterile culture.
That nothing more important conceptually happened in the 20th century than that. Because it was the first time post-Enlightenment that a rapprochement between the intellect and the underlying religious archetypal substructure occurred. You have in the capacious intellect of Jung, and the same thing happened to some degree with Piaget, the religious domain and the factual domain were brought back together. And the fact of Jung's enduring and increasing popularity and influence, I would say, is a direct consequence of that.
Jordan's knowledge that helped millions had its roots in this different understanding of what's most real. It's his single focus on proving the correctness of this different notion that plagues him now.
Now, for a long time, it seems as if, as long as we acted it out and represented it symbolically, and didn't argue about the assumptions, it was more or less okay. But we're past that now. And in order for us to benefit from the same protective structures that our ancestors benefited from, we now have to understand what they mean consciously. And that's really what Jung was up to. What he was really trying to do was to resurrect deep religious representations from the dead, so to speak, and to make them conscious so people could align themselves with them again.
Jung once wrote, "All my works, all my creative activity has come from those initial fantasies and dreams which began in 1912. Everything that I have written later has only been the outer classification, scientific elaboration, and the integration into knowledge of the immensity of those primal experiences. Peterson thinks the reason Jung's ideas haven't been fully integrated into society is because,
even with Jung, it's not fully articulated. He's still saturated in image to a large degree, but no wonder, it's very complicated to make this sort of thing fully articulated.
Peterson has been trying to purge Jung's ideas of image for a very long time. It's Jordan's obsession with making this material fully explicit and rational, so our culture might accept it, that's causing him to suffer from the disease that he dedicated his life to helping others escape, is causing him to break.
If you think of the capacity to interact in a group as composed of knowledge that's implicit and tacit as well as explicit, then if you only go for the explicit knowledge, then you risk missing the tacit knowledge. That's the stuff that's embodied, say, in nonverbal behavior.
But people seem to have different levels of ability of transforming explicit knowledge into tacit knowledge. I mean,
and also different willingness to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the interplay between the memory systems, the ability to go down the hierarchy as well as up.
Right. Well, we often don't think that going down it is necessary. Right, and I think that's because we take the attitude that you just described, is that if you know the words, you don't have to know the music. You don't have to know how to put it into action. And I think that's part of the reason, actually, by the way, that the general public in the USA, for example, holds intellectuals in contempt, is because, like, we think the fact is the knowledge, and that's wrong. It's like, unless you can act out the fact, you're an idiot.
Peterson's words have lost their music because of his obsession with transforming this knowledge that's always been passed down through myth and art into a rational, verbal, explicit argument. Due to this fixation, he's been fully regulated to his map, his schema, and can no longer see through it, but only it. And he suffers the same result anyone else who can't escape their mind does.
Here's the approaching problem. The totalitarian intellect. It's like, and that's exactly right. If you talk to people who are suffering existentially, they're always in love with the products of their intellect. They do not pay attention. They say, well, I can't see how my life has any meaning. And the answer to that is, you're not seeing, you're thinking. And you can easily think yourself into a corner where your life has no meaning. It's a cheap trick. I can say, who cares about this documentary? No one, it's not going to matter in 1 billion years, right? Or in 100 years, or whatever. I can pick a time frame within which this event is irrelevant. Okay, so then you can derive from that fact that it's irrelevant. Or you can derive from that fact that that's a stupid way to think. So, and you can derive the conclusion that it's a stupid way to think if you haven't made thinking your God. So, and there's lots of other things that work better than thinking. Paying attention is better than thinking.
As Peterson says, by definition, at a higher and higher rate when describing this material, he sees himself getting closer to making this knowledge fully conscious, fully explicit, fully known, and so he's almost done it. Paradigm problem solved. But, in reality, he's turning Jung's message into just another dead, rational ideology, and himself into a shadow of what he once was.
As new ideologies rose up to try to occupy the territory that the previous ideology, it's not, a religion really isn't an ideology, because most of a religion is implicit. And most of an ideology is explicit, I think, because someone actually wrote it down. Like communism, for example, is more like, in a sense, more like a scientific system, because all the presuppositions are actually explicit.
This video will attempt to explain why Peterson believes our culture is hurting, and how the implementation of his solution to help is really hurting him. It will take an approach more similar to Jung and his image-ridden Red Book than Peterson in his book Maps of Meaning by using the word brick, a word still tainted with image. This strange word, and the different areas it pops up, will provide the necessary
ambulation, a continual wandering around a center.
So it's possible to understand this material that Peterson is desperately trying to make linear and rational, and so kind of dead and cliched. We will start our circumambulation with the help of basketball. A guy takes a shot, swishes it, and realizes something new about his form. The ball's release point perfectly split his index and ring finger during the shot. The next shot, he shoots with the intention of having the ball come off that perfect mark. The guy shoots up. This video will show how Peterson's goal went from helping to proving, and how this faulty focus made him into a shell of who he once was. It will also attempt to explain why Peterson thinks our culture is becoming an ossified structure too, because it's necessary to understand the problem he's addressing to understand the problem with him.
Does anybody know where the word avatar came from? Anybody?
Wasn't it originally used to as like a direct agent of a god?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So an avatar is the embodiment of the deity on Earth. It's such a cool idea. It's so interesting that that word was used to represent your fictional self inside a video game, you know? It's one of the mysteries about words. You never know how those things get generated or catch on.
Many accusations were thrown at Peterson during his rise to fame. Young was also
Accused of many things, such as starting a new religion, by some rather unscrupulous biographers. But what he did was actually far more radical than anything he's ever been accused of.
These attacks on Peterson, no matter how ridiculous, left an impact. He got singled out and vilified so frequently, it was almost strange. I'm guessing Dave Smith and Candace Owens could relate. Dave, who is Jewish, has been very critical of Israel's treatment of Palestinians. Candace Owens argued against the Black Lives Matter movement at its height. Jordan Peterson, an intellectual who used to work at Harvard, a highly cited scientist, an expert who's really into Young and from Canada, was hinting that some on the left were going too far, attempting to dictate speech back in 2016. He embodied what many on the left thought they valued the most, and he critiqued them during a time when they were very sure of themselves. They took it poorly. Scandals, hit pieces, contentious interviews all tensed him up. His life became chaotic.
Those are tightropes, you know, because if you make a mistake, well, it can be devastating, and devastating to your career, devastating to your family, devastating to your general reputation. So tightrope.
I think most people watching you thought that you are completely fearless, kind of cool as a cucumber, unfazed by any amount of attacks.
Yeah, that's wrong.
That's wrong. Okay.
Oh yeah, that's definitely wrong.
He walked it well for a few years, but he overworked himself and things just became too much.
What you learn if you're going to be a psychologist is that people come to you with mental illnesses, and that's almost never true. People come to you because their lives are so damn complicated they cannot stay on top of them in any way that doesn't make it look like they're just going to get more complicated. And so then that causes symptoms, you know. It's like, there's this old idea, it's sort of a metaphor for genetic susceptibility. Take a balloon and blow it up until it's beyond its tolerance, it's going to blow out at the weakest point. Well, that's sort of what a genetic susceptibility is. If I just keep adding complexity on top of you, at some point you'll blow out at your weakest point.
Jordan's weakest point? He thinks a lot.
For 20 of those years, I did almost nothing but think about that all the time.
He also tends to ignore what that much thinking does to a body.
It was an indescribable relief. I mean, what happened was it kind of knocked me onto the couch for about 3 days. And I could feel muscles in my body relax that I know I can still feel how it felt. It was such a relief. I could feel muscles in my body relax that probably hadn't relaxed for 15 years. And it was just, and to understand how that feels. And so that scares people sometimes if they take antidepressants because they're afraid of the medication. And doing that to you is actually a good thing because what's happening is your serotonin levels are going up, and when your serotonin levels go up, then your musculature can relax. You're not all tensed up and ready for the worst. And being like that for like 10 years is no joke. And so I thought, well, when I took the serotonin reuptake inhibitor, I thought, I will never stop taking this, ever.
And you have not?
No.
Jordan Peterson just checked himself into rehab.
What?
Yeah.
Whoa. For what?
He got on an anti-anxiety Klonopin.
To avoid the devastation of falling off his wire, he resorted to the knowledge that he knew wasn't wrong.
My first book, I suspect I rewrote every sentence at least 15 times. It's probably more than that. And I really literally mean rewrite it. So I take the sentence out of the paragraph, put it in another document, write like 10 variants of the sentence, and then pick the one that was best. And I did that. Like it took me 15 years to write. I did that over and over and over. And so I'd write a sentence and then I'd think, okay,
Have I got all the words right? Every single word, is that the proper words, the proper phrase, is it the proper sentence? Do I believe that this sentence is true? Then I'd think like of 10 ways I could attack it and see if I could break it apart and find out what it was wrong. And I only kept the ones that I couldn't destroy. And like I was going out full force to destroy them because I wanted to come up with I wanted to produce a book that I could not break no matter what I did.
As the years went on, Peterson's flexible personality started to stiffen up for the certainty and security found in his book, so the intention behind his words shifted from give out as much useful information as possible, the reason young people made him famous, to defend rightness of book and theory. He stopped relying on his embodied dynamic knowledge gained from years of teaching and having a clinical practice, and he started to put his faith in the explicit written word he produced 20 plus years ago. And since the point of the book is to make explicit, make conscious these archetypal structures, that's become the point of him. He stopped listening and responding and started reciting. He started to see and act through the lens of a book. His book, but still a book.
Dad, why are you yelling?
Cuz that's the way we talk in sports. Go get him!
Okay, Dad!
All right.
Go, go, go!
All right, good start. Spalding. It says Spalding, Brick. Don't read the ball!
Jordan's fluid, spontaneous responses he grew famous for have almost ceased with his tendency to recite pre-written words with ever more certainty. Young writes in the Red Book, I still labored misguidedly under the spirit of this time and thought differently about the human soul. I thought and spoke much of the soul. I knew many learned words for her. I had judged her and turned her into a scientific object. I had to accept that what I had previously called my soul was not at all my soul, but a dead system. I had become aware that I had lost my soul. Young soul angrily said to him, Do you know then who I am? Have you grasped me, defined me, and made me into a dead formula? Much of Peterson's personality has ossified into a dead formula trying to free people from a dying society. The paradoxical nature of Peterson's character, a man caught in his intellect, striving to prove the dangers of a culture based on the intellect, is apparent during his conversations with Ian McGilchrist, the author of the book The Matter with Things. I would have to think that Peterson views McGilchrist as one of or the living thinker whose work and ideas most closely resembles his own.
But you're also pointing to a kind of philosophical malaise, right? So there's a conceptual problem, yes, but also an emotional or broad scale philosophical problem. And
there is indeed. And indeed, if I may say so, the book that I hope will come out fairly soon called The Matter with Things, which is a pun on several levels, because I think it's a critique not only of the way we think now, but of our obsession with thinking of the world as composed of things and that only matter exists. But anyway, in that book, what I'm really trying to do is marry science and philosophy again. They never should have been separated.
Ian has studied the cyclical nature of cultures and has noted their tendency to predictably demonstrate what he calls left hemisphere thinking before their collapse.
I suggest there were three periods in the West, in early Greek civilization, in the peak of Roman civilization, and again at the Renaissance in the West, where these were working well together. But in every case, it slid further to the viewpoint of the left hemisphere, and in every case, the civilization has crumbled. And I see the evidence for that all around me now.
The extremes of left hemisphere thinking that occur after an individual suffers a stroke hints at the style of thinking he believes our culture is suffering from.
There's wonderful, very rich accounts of patients. One of the ones that I really like is an experiment done by, Biziak and Luzzati, I think, back in the late 1970s, where they got a couple of highly educated people with right hemisphere strokes. And they was in Milan at the time, and they said, these people lived in Milan, and they said, imagine you're standing in the Piazza del Duomo in front of the cathedral and looking at the square. Describe all the buildings in the square, and they would describe only the ones on the right side that the left hemisphere only pays attention to. Whereas, but I need to say for the viewers that the right hemisphere pays attention to both halves of the world. So when you have a a left hemisphere stroke, the world is relatively preserved globally. But after a right hemisphere stroke, you're only relying on this left hemisphere. It's interested in the bit of space which it can manipulate, the bit on the right. So they named the buildings down the right-hand side of the view of the square they had then. And then the experimenters asked them to go to the other end of the square and look at the cathedral facade and name the buildings. And this time they named all the ones down the other side of the square, but didn't mention any of the ones they just mentioned. So there's something, it's been commented by one philosopher that it's almost like there's an ontological landslide. Things come in and out of existence for the left hemisphere. And when it was pointed out to these people what they'd missed, they became angry, irritable, and frustrated, which is a typical left hemisphere emotional timbre. Impatient to dismiss this. So I think that's intriguing. I mean, it's just one image. I mean, the very dramatic one is to do with denying that you have parts of the body. And as was pointed out by Fritz Langeler, I think, way back in the second decade of the 20th century, they don't only deny after a right hemisphere stroke that they have the left half of the body, which is not functioning because of the right hemisphere stroke. They will become very irritable if questions are asked about it, or they will just go blank. I mean, they will be talking perfectly coherently, and they're asked about that, and they will go stumm, or they will become very irritated. And if you force them to recognize that they have a body on that side, although they're perfectly intelligent people, they know they must always have had a left half of their body, they will deny it. And he says it's as though they never had a left half of the body. It's not only that it's not there now, it never was for them and never will be. Now, that's what I mean when I say that there are different levels of creativity of the world, or the creation of the world through attention, I should say, in the two hemispheres.
Ian notes how those captured by ideological certainties also don't like it when contrary evidence is brought to their attention. He writes, "The left hemisphere would rather believe what it says on this piece of paper than the evidence of its own senses. It is not keen on taking responsibility. If the defect might reflect on the self, it is not like to accept it. But if something or someone else can be made to take responsibility, if it is a victim of someone else's wrongdoing, in other words, it is prepared to do so." Ramachandran carried out an experiment in which a patient with denial of a left arm paralysis received an injection of harmless salt water that she was told would paralyze her, in reality, already paralyzed, left arm. Once her left hemisphere had someone else to blame for it, it was prepared to accept the existence of the paralysis. Ramachandran again. The left hemisphere is a conformist, largely indifferent to discrepancies, whereas the right hemisphere is the opposite, highly sensitive to perturbation. Denial, a tendency to conformism, a willingness to disregard the evidence, a habit of ducking responsibility, a blindness to mere experience in the face of the overwhelming evidence of theory. These might sound ominously familiar to observers of contemporary Western life. The left hemisphere works from the world of abstractions, theories, and so certainties.
But the abstraction, I'd like to separate that out, because I think that's what the left hemisphere really specializes in, is abstracting. And when you abstract, you are left really with something like a skeleton. You're left with a diagram, a theory, a map that doesn't have all the embodied knowledge.
The left hemisphere deals with representations, not reality. It believes the map is more real than the thing it's intended to map.
Happy St. Patrick's Day to all of our Native American friends. On the big map, where's my map? There's no map. It's just green.
No, there's a map there. Look at the monitor.
Right?
Oh, God. Ron, where's my legs? Where are my legs?
Your legs are there.
I don't have any legs, Ron. I don't even know how I'm standing up.
No. Brick, your legs are fine. The color of your pants just matches the...
Ron, I don't have any legs.
The chroma key behind you.
In 93! 93!
Relax.
The more Peterson relies on his map, his explicit written knowledge, the less there is of him.
The stories that you tell about people with right hemisphere damage point to the proclivity of the left to usurp and to deny.
It does.
Right. And that's part of, you can imagine that. So maybe it's also curious. I wonder how much of the
inadequacies of the left hemisphere that you point to in your book are actually a consequence of its misuse rather than its intrinsic nature.
Well, that comes down to the whole point about it being a servant. It's a good servant, but a very poor master.
Right. Well, that's the intellect in a nutshell.
Well, that's what Einstein also said.
Yeah.
So it is the intellect in a nutshell. It is a useful servant, but it should never be the end point. It doesn't have wisdom.
It's the worst possible master.
Yes,
that's the Luciferian story, fundamentally. Right, and that seems to me to be exactly right.
Peterson has adopted the worst possible master in his attempt to use it to bring down the cultural dominance of it. So, Peterson is constantly in the emergency mode that characterizes rule of the left hemisphere, rule of the intellect.
And this focal attention on the detail is what the left hemisphere does. It can only take in about 3 degrees of the attentional arc. So it's incredibly limited. Mm-hmm. And as Whitehead says, it has its uses in an emergency, but really it's not a satisfactory way for living. And what I think is happening is that we are now more and more saying anything that I'm not actually focusing on right now doesn't exist. All the implicit stuff, all the unconscious stuff, all the things that go to make up the richness of our both cognitive and emotional and embodied selves isn't really important. We've focused down on this tiny bit that the relatively unintelligent left hemisphere knows about.
Csikszentmihalyi largely talks about what you might call hot flow, and the flow that you experience, the flow you experience when there's a lot of metabolic expenditure. But you can get into the flow state when you're doing Tai Chi Chuan, and you're not doing a tremendous kind of at least physiological. I imagine there's stuff going on cognitively, but you don't have that same sense of I'm going to burn out. You have this different
I need some of that because I have that sense of I must be in a hot state of flow then all the time.
As Peterson demonstrates more and more left hemisphere thinking, he starts to acquire the traits of an ideologue, the traits he got famous denouncing. Many saw the Give Them Hell tweet as proof that the old Jordan was fully gone. Old Jordan got famous for never being in a box, never tied to an ideological group, always able to look in from the outside, and this tweet hinted that phase was over.
There are 356 references to Cain in the book and 20 references to the descendants of Cain. You're obsessed with Cain because Cain is symbolic of evil. All the evil in the world you more or less blame Cain for.
Ideologue Bricking Peterson sees this post as something very rational because the Palestinians are Cain-like. The Jewish people are a successful minority. The existence of a successful minority indicates that the world might not be solely an oppressor versus oppressed patriarchal tyranny. Unsuccessful people have resentment towards the successful because their success sheds a dark light on them. This is the motivation described in Genesis when Cain murders Abel. The Palestinians have an animosity towards Israelis, making them Cain-like, which means evil, and writing a tweet like "Give Them Hell" is moral and justified. The fact that the Palestinians have a name that resembles the Philistines, a group of Canaanites, probably doesn't help their odds of having a favorable disposition in Jordan's eyes when he's in this ideological reflexive mode. It's like he has a one-word answer for everything.
I also think it is a patriarchal institution. It is literally...
Of course you think that, because you think virtually everything that occurs in our society is a patriarchal institution. And it's easy to think that because then you only have to think one thing. You have a one-thing answer for everything.
You could let
it's part of the patriarchal institution.
I don't think you're obeying the rule that says maybe treat people as if they have something worth hearing. So
I'm not making a case for the patriarchal tyranny. I don't think you are either. I think that you're making a case that's like a universally cliched case for the patriarchal tyranny. I don't see too much of you reflected in your articles at all.
This is Jordan asking Joe Rogan how he attempts to control who and what ideas are permitted on his large platform.
How do you know that? How do you take great care that the people you're talking to aren't, what would you say, eliciting or feeding a subculture, yeah, that's right, that hasn't got the proper aims?
The fact that he struggled to get that out gives me hope for Peterson. The old Peterson who defended free speech against ideologues is still in there somewhere. In the meantime, more and more people are becoming Cain-like dark tetrad psychopaths for Peterson. Jordan tells us those people are bad. Peterson and McGilchrist view culture as a dynamic, living organism that, like the humans that make up the culture, can become rigid and stultify, can start to demonstrate left hemisphere thinking, can Brick.
For the left hemisphere, if it isn't in the map, as it were, then it doesn't exist.
Right.
It's not on the map, so it can't be real. And this
that's deconstructionism in a nutshell, right? Is this privileging of epistemology?
It's imaged throughout various movements in the history of ideas in our lifetime, is getting more and more extreme, so that people's theory about what the world should be like is now the only reality. And if things don't conform to it, it's because some terrible people have been deliberately trying to frustrate it.
Right. Well, so do you have some sense sociologically why this has intensified as of late? Like, is it a necessary consequence of our scientific and technological prowess and the philosophy that's come along with that? And do you think technology is accelerating this in some sense?
Ian said yes, rather quickly.
Very much. The Industrial Revolution was a kind of acting out in the outer world of the world picture of the left hemisphere in some ways. I talk about that more in The Master and His Emissary, but
it's phenomenally successful.
It's ruling out everything, really. It's ruling out our ability to understand, to see at all. I mean, a number of very important people, one of them, Goethe, said, thinking is good, but seeing is so much better. And I think we just don't see things anymore because we don't expect them. We don't understand them. We've ruled them out from the word go because our world picture doesn't contain them. And if you stop doing that and start attending in a more flexible way, you find there's a massively complex and fascinating, rich, nourishing response to your attention. It's the absence of that causes the meaning crisis, which is constantly being bandied about.
Well,
there is a meaning crisis.
The Egyptians knew that. The ancient Egyptians knew that.
Yeah,
because the god Horus is the eye, and its attention, and it is Horus that revitalizes Osiris, and he's the god of structure. And they saw the proper sovereignty was a combination of attention and structure, a dynamic combination of attention and structure.
Well, this is
absolutely brilliant.
And so your computers have Osiris problems all the time. It's like they're just lovely for the first 3 years that you own them, and then they're bricks. And it's because the underlying landscape is so dynamic that the structure loses its validity. You can almost watch it lose its validity, right, as a consequence of the exponential increase in computer intelligence. So Osiris, great guy when he was young, little, old-fashioned, and worse, he's willfully blind.
Peterson and McGilchrist seem to believe our culture's current state of blindness stems mostly from our obsessive dependence on science and its technological miracles. Hades, an Osiris-like figure from the Broadway hit Hadestown, depicts our culture's relentless push for technological progress above all else. Hades electrifies his domain with neon lighting, transforming it into one vast machine. Hades rules as the King of Bricks. The hero Orpheus tries to free Hades' obedient workers from endlessly stacking bricks on the ever-growing walls that encircle the town. To understand why Peterson and McGilchrist believe we've lost sight beyond Hadestown's walls, our current culture, it's helpful to understand why Peterson's channel opens with,
I don't think the world's made out of matter. I think it's made out of what matters.
And why Ian's book is called...
There are many ways of construing the meaning of the title, The Matter with Things. Partly it's a pun on our obsession with material and our obsession with the idea that the world is made up of things. Never mind the reference to the fact that there seems to be something that is the matter with things at the moment.
Peterson thinks this word matter and the evolution of its use sheds light on the historical development of our current social dilemma. The modern age we live in was thought to be quite different from what it turned out to be. People expected a different type of development, a different type of scientific revolution, a different outcome from what we inherited.
Taking it you're not Catholic.
No.
How would you finish this sentence? Patrick, right now I'm not Catholic because...
Oh, well, I can give you a comical answer.
Sure.
I have my own church.
You have your own church?
I set up like 6 years ago, something like that. Yeah.
Is it the Church of Jordan?
No, it's not. It's the Church of St. Joachim of Florus, actually.
St. Joachim of Florus. Okay.
Yeah, he was a mystic, a medieval mystic who just about got burnt at the stake. He had a doctrine of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And it was a kind of a precursor to psychoanalytic theory, I would say, where he believed there was a Christian epoch of the 1,000 years that was the epoch of the Father, and then there was an epoch of the Son, and then there would be an epoch of the Holy Spirit, which was the dawning modern age. And I kind of liked that idea. I thought it was interesting developmental progression.
Peterson believes this dawning modern age, intuited long ago, got sidetracked with the particular type of scientific revolution we experienced. Young and Peterson have famously argued that the motive force behind science came out of the dream of alchemy. They argue it's the lack of the full integration of this dream into our culture that causes its current state.
Modern science is the result of the wedding of the Hermetic tradition with the mechanical philosophy. In its spectacular flight, modern science has ignored or rejected the heritage of Hermeticism. Or, to put it differently, the triumph of Newtonian mechanics has ended up by annihilating its own scientific ideal. In effect, Newton and his contemporaries expected a different type of scientific revolution. In prolonging and developing the hopes and objectives, the first among these being the redemption of nature, of the neo-alchemist of the Renaissance, minds as different as those of Paracelsus, John Dee, Comenius, J.V. Andrié, Flood, and Newton saw in alchemy the model for a no less ambitious enterprise, the perfection of man by a new method of knowledge. In their perspective, such a method had to integrate into a non-confessional Christianity the Hermetic tradition and the natural sciences of medicine, astronomy, and mechanics. In fact, this synthesis constituted a new Christian creation, comparable to the brilliant results obtained by the earlier integrations of Platonism, Aristotelianism, and Neoplatonism. This type of knowledge, dreamed of and partially elaborated in the 18th century, represents the last enterprise of Christian Europe that was undertaken with the aim of obtaining a total knowledge. Not precisely the last.
Jordan attempted to do a lot with his first book. He's trying to provide the new paradigm and way of thinking that the scientific revolution was intended to produce, so people might leave the one-sided, errant thinking of today.
All right. So alchemy, as a precursor to science, was based initially on a fantasy. And the fantasy was, if we paid enough attention to the transformations of matter rather than of spirit, that we could redeem what Christianity, with its emphasis on the spirit, had failed to redeem. So it was sort of like all the 14th century Europeans woke up and said, Christ died for our sins, and we're supposed to be redeemed, but a lot of guys down there with leprosy in the ditch, so it doesn't seem to have exactly, fulfilled its promise. And so he felt that the European imagination started to drift into the transformations of the material world. But that was also part of what was fundamentally a redemptive process. It was just a more comprehensive redemptive process. It was, all right, well, we kind of got the spirit organized. Now it's time to do something about the dreadful body that we're dragging around with us instead of merely damning it to perdition.
Instead of the integration of these two competing systems, our culture is in a chronic state of either-or, leading to some strange priorities.
Since the scientific age began, we've lived in a universe where the bottom strata of reality is considered to be something that's dead, like dirt. It's matter. It's objective. It's external. And there isn't any element of it that lends any reality to phenomena like meaning or purpose. That's all been relegated to the subjective and in some ways to the illusory.
And since
we don't really have infinite knowledge, and so we're always making some sets of presuppositions about what's most real. And it really matters what you assume is most real, because you base the decisions that you make that run the entire course of your life on those assumptions, whether you recognize it or not. And if you get the assumptions wrong, or even if you leave them incomplete, you're going to pay a big price for it.
One of these costs might be reflected in some of our elites' strange ways of thinking.
About I think you would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
Yes?
I don't know. I would.
This is a long hesitation. This is a long hesitation.
There's so many questions implicit
Should
in this.
the human race survive?
Yes.
Okay.
But
this thinking is perfectly rational if the goal of humanity is the progression of technology. If technology can advance itself better than humans, why need humans?
The assumptions that we use in our culture, although they've enabled us to develop a tremendously potent technology, are incomplete in ways that have also cost us and that are extremely dangerous.
Peterson argues that our modern paradigm, built on the axiom of modern matter, has replaced humanity's purpose with the strategy, technology, which was only meant to serve our striving, not become the end goal of all of our sweat and work. When man is made of dead matter, he's one thing among many things. Technology is very impressive next to humans. However, when humans saw themselves made of this alchemical matter, they thought a little higher of themselves.
We might therefore make this discussion more concrete by first examining the matter of the alchemist and by comparing it to what we think of as matter. Alchemical matter was the stuff of which experience was made, and more, the stuff of which the experiencing creature was made. This primal element was something much more akin to information in the modern sense, or to Tao from the Oriental perspective. Something like matter in the phrases that matters.
This is Peterson describing the nature of this alchemical matter.
You see this played out. People know this. Everyone knows this. It's just that our culture isn't good at articulating it. We've lost a lot of this. We haven't developed our knowledge about this as much as we've developed our knowledge of the objective world, and we're paying for it. You see it in weird places. On the right here, there's an old symbol at the bottom. It's called the round chaos. And the alchemists believed that the round chaos was the thing that held what the world was ultimately made of, the thing that was most real, and they conceptualized it as something like information. They thought about it as a combination of spirit and matter. And it was a combination of spirit and matter, which is what information is in a sense, because when you interacted with it, you took some of the information and you built yourself out of it, so that was the spiritual element, and you took some of the information and you built the world out of it, and that was the material element. And they thought of the reality itself as something that preceded the spiritual and the material, and that reality was what shone forth.
What Peterson is trying to get across might be made simpler by going back to bricked basketball shots. What's the opposite of a bricked shot?
What's the water? The water of life. Chaos is water. Water is chaos. Water is what washes away too much order. And to stay continually, let's say, refreshed by the water of life is to take on exactly the right amount of chaos to make sure that your garden is properly nourished. And I think meaning is actually the marker of that.
And after spending a bit of time in China during the off-season, he learned how to say wet ball.
Yeah, for sure. I know what was going on.
So that counts as a wet ball then?
What you think?
Yeah.
Did it hit rim?
I didn't see
it. Yeah. You didn't see it?
I saw it. I got a good shot.
Did it hit rim?
No.
Wet ball then. She cho.
So, how I say wet ball?
Wet ball?
Wet ball. That's a basketball term that I use when I shoot the ball and I know it's going in. I say wet ball.
Peterson argues this watery state of meaning comes off
as interesting. They grab you. And where you're grabbed is where the obscuring map you live in isn't obscuring the reality that's underneath. It's like there's a hole in the map, and the light shines through that, and you're attracted to that, and that will pull you along. And that's when your interest is seized by something. That's your nervous system doing that. You don't do that. It's an unconscious force. You could even say it was the world itself talking to you. And the phenomenologists did feel that way. And it's a real phenomenon. It's not a secondary thing, and you know that because you can't live without it. You die, you stultify, you get cynical, you get nihilistic, or you adopt some wild belief system if you don't have the attachment to some genuine life-giving meaning in your own life.
Peterson believes our nervous systems are, strangely, adapted to the reality of bricked or wet actions, not Newtonian atoms. And what have we adapted to, if not reality?
Dr. McGilchrist, you spent a lot of time thinking about hemispheric specialization, and that's an understatement. And one of the things I find quite remarkable about
the fact of hemispheric specialization is something like its implication for what? Understanding the reflection of the world. And Richard Dawkins said something very interesting about biological organisms. He said they have to be a model of the environment in order to function in the environment.
Sure.
Well, there's a duality of hemispheric specialization, and that implies a kind of ontological duality, essentially. And so let's start with what you make of that.
Since we are adapted to this paradoxical reality, we know when we are actively connected to it.
The one I wanted to ask you about, though, is the look away 3. Do you remember the first time you did it in a game?
Yeah, it was, I want to say it was either game 3 or game 4 of our first playoff series against Denver in 2013. And we go on this crazy run. I have, knocking shots down left and right. And the last kind of one in the third quarter, right in front of Denver's bench, JaVale McGee's standing, like literally standing up. There's like 5 or 6 guys around him, and get the ball in the corner. And obviously you've been in that situation where you rise up and everybody's just talking, trash behind you. And for some reason I just got an out of body experience. I shot it. And literally, as we let it go, it's like I never felt the shot feel better than that. And I turned around and kind of looked at JaVale and then just ran off and it went in. And that was when I didn't even check to see if it went in.
Curry doesn't need to look back because a wet shot is a made shot, not a metaphor or symbol for a good shot. Peterson thinks we have intentionally ignored the other half of the alchemical dream, the perfection of man and nature, and only focused on the development of technology and objective science, because of the terrible weight that comes with this fuller realization. When man is made of this stranger matter, he becomes the center of things.
The conviction that the opus alchemicum could save both man and nature prolonged the nostalgia for a radical renovatio, a nostalgia which had haunted Western Christianity since Joachim of Florus.
If he could just make the alchemical dream fully explicit, our culture couldn't remain in its unconscious modern bricking shell. He wants to help shift our culture into the true radical renovatio anticipated by many. This age of the Holy Spirit, as Joachim of Florence called it, this dawning modern era, would be the fulfillment of the last 2,000 years of Christianity. The strict adherence to this belief system disciplined the mind over the centuries, a needed stage. But the disciplined mind is meant for more than strict obedience to any system or beliefs. Peterson thinks the age of belief might be coming to a close. It was needed, but it's time to move on.
People ask themselves, for example, do you believe in God? And I would say that's actually a nonsensical question. I would say whether or not you believe in God, you're more or less stuck with him. He's there whether you believe it or not, and it has nothing to do with belief, and I'll tell you why. It's actually straightforward.
Peterson struggles with the question, do you believe in God? Because his entire life has been trying to move us past the Christian ion of belief and worship and into the age of I know. Him saying yes or no to that question negates his entire life's work. He thinks we might not even have the right to belief anymore, even though belief was good and needed for the Christianity of the last 2,000 years.
What sort of religious upbringing did your father give you?
Oh, we were Swiss Reformed.
And did he make you attend church regularly?
Oh, well, that was quite natural.
Yes.
Everybody went to church on Sunday.
And did you believe in God?
Oh, yes.
Do you now believe in God?
Now? Difficult to answer. I know. I don't need to believe. I know.
Peterson is trying to usher in the age of I know by proving the knowing by rational scientific means. In his attempt to fight fire with fire, he's gotten burnt. Newton and his mechanical worldview was proved wrong by Einstein over 100 years ago, yet most of us still cling to the atomistic world. Peterson argues we clutch onto this dated worldview for reasons other than empirical reason.
It is significant that the founder of modern mechanics did not reject the tradition of a primordial and secret revelation, just as he did not reject the principle of transmutation.
Peterson says this to show how even Newton wasn't a strict Newtonian, or at least wasn't always. If Newton didn't reject the larger dream science was born out of, we shouldn't either.
Dobbs affirms that Newton experimented in his laboratory with the operations described in the immense alchemical literature, probing the latter as it has never been probed before or since. With the aid of alchemy, Newton hoped to discover the structure of the micro-universe in order to homologize it with his cosmological system. The discovery of gravity, the force which keeps the planets in their orbits, did not completely satisfy him. But although he pursued the experiments indefatigably from 1669 to 1696, he did not succeed in identifying the forces which govern the corpuscles.
The discovery of gravity didn't satisfy Newton's desire to unite these two worlds, but something else did. Perhaps what distracted Newton in 1696 is what distracts us now.
Also, Newton, who's a famous physicist from England, he was very interested in alchemy and he wrote a lot on alchemy. And then the Bank of England was created, and Newton was very interested in that. Because basically the Bank of England was alchemy at work. You're creating money out of nothing, but not through the actual physical alchemy process. It is the credit creation alchemy.
Newton became the warden of the Royal Mint in 1696 and its master in 1699, a post he held for the rest of his life. Richard Werner describes how modern banking has many alchemical-like traits that tend to be ignored, so he chose to conduct a study.
Watch inside the box, inside the bank's accounting system, how are they accounting for this and what transactions are taking place when I take out my loan. The intermediation theory says deposits get lent out. The fractional reserve theory says that the bank needs to have excess reserves at the central bank and that's then used for the new loan.
Yes.
And the credit creation theory, you know what it says? It says when you get a loan, no money is transferred to you. It's transferred away from anywhere else. And you just credited new money out of nothing that is not transferred away anywhere inside or outside the bank, which seems, quite sort of extreme.
Like magic.
In fact, one uses, the convention is to use Latin for this. The money is created ex nihilo, out of nothing. So when it did the empirical test, the conclusion was the financial intermediation theory is rejected and the fractional reserve theory is rejected. Banks create money out of nothing. By the way, you can look it up. It's the most downloaded paper of all Elsevier publications and it's open access. So, can banks individually create money out of nothing?
Any bank. Just to be clear, not just central banks.
Any bank. In fact, that's the whole point. We're talking about normal banks. With central banks, it wouldn't be a surprise.
But the Bank of Omaha can
any bank creates money. When you take out a loan, the money that you're given as the borrower didn't previously exist. It is net new purchasing power that is being created and added to the money supply. And that's how the system works.
Richard Werner is most famous for his book, Princes of the Yen, where, using credit creation theory, he details how central banking policies from the West intentionally caused the Japanese and many other recessions.
So the central bank was used essentially as a traitor to blow up the system. It's the same in the Asian crisis, With the Asian crisis, I was at the time at the Asian Development Bank, and I was sent as an official representative to the government and central bank of Thailand to analyze what's going on with this Asian crisis and what are the right policies. And it so quickly emerged the same mechanism, the same goals as in Japan. This was to destroy the success, blow up the system, create a crash, create a crisis, and then also IMF forcing them to open up to foreign investment, and because there was so much strong growth and prosperity, but the Western big owners and banks didn't have any ownership in this. And the Asian crisis and Japan crisis, Korean crisis was a way to force it open, and then the West could buy it up very cheaply.
So you think that the Japanese recession was created, by the Bank of Japan, but with the encouragement of the West in order to slow down?
Yes, the U.S. and particularly the Fed. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I show in my book. There's no doubt about it, and there's been no contrary evidence or that anything in my book was incorrect.
So you write this book, published only in Japanese, at least at first. And it, as I said at the outset, rockets to the top of the bestseller list in Japan, beating Harry Potter, which is amazing. And then what happens?
Yes, what happened next?
And why haven't I read this book, and why is it not on our bestseller list?
Well, yeah.
Richard Werner wrote a chapter in 2001 about the Federal Reserve using similar strategies towards the American housing market. He was unable to get his best-selling book published in English until that particular chapter was removed. The goal of the people who control money seems to be something other than human prosperity. I asked Rock what Americans typically spend per year towards just interest. Interest paid on money created out of nothing. The American who pays their taxes, went to college, bought a house, has a car, owes a hefty price for the possibility of making payments. Apparently, it could easily be over $30,000 a year. I wonder how many months it takes the average American to work and earn that kind of money. What is it, then, about the nature of our money that permits its owners to extract such a toll for its use? John Maynard Keynes, the most famous economist of the 20th century, called the man who attempted to answer that question a strange, unduly neglected prophet. His name was Silvio Gesell, a German merchant and self-taught economist. As a merchant, he learned about money by using it, not reading and theorizing about it. He came to realize that the merchant, the person who buys to sell again, had an unfair advantage over the producers of actual goods. This edge comes from our immortal money based on non-rusting metals. What happens to the money in the merchant's checkbook if he chooses to wait a little while before buying a producer's goods, like a farmer's crops? Money, like gold and silver, does not rust or perish. It does not age. It requires no storage costs, so nothing really happens. All goods, however, besides certain jewels and fine wines, slowly lose value with time. Rust, rot, fire, insects. Nature herself affects all goods, except the medium of exchange of those goods. What happens to food after a few months? What happens to practically everything real and tangible after time passes and nature does its thing? The thing gets worse. If the merchant, on a whim, chooses to wait before buying, the stress of time is solely on the producers stuck dealing with nature, giving the man of money a little extra bargaining power. The advantage gained from our unnatural money earns a little extra price for the merchant, what Gesell calls basic or primordial interest, averaging a profit of around 5% per year. Long story short, the holder of money will only offer up his money, the thing needed to keep the economy going, if this tribute is paid. This demand for payment for money's use burdens the economy and can create artificial scarcity. Money won't be invested in housing unless those real houses can garner interest more effectively than money can. This can keep real capital, houses and cars, in a perpetual state of scarcity because the second their real capital can't gain a similar rate of return as money can, aka too many houses, supply is too great, building will stop. That's why we can find ourselves in situations he calls poverty amid plenty. His solution was simple: kill money, slowly. Have it slowly perish like the rest of goods to level the playing field. This dying money was most famously used in a small town in Austria during the Great Depression. It's called the miracle of Wurgel. Once this perishable currency started to circulate, Wurgel's unemployment rate went from well above 30% in 1932 to almost zero in 1933. This shift occurred when the rest of the nation's unemployment continued to rise. A monthly 1% tax on the currency freed money from being hoarded. This new money that people happily parted with circulated 14 times faster than the national shilling. The local economy hummed. The streets were paved and newly installed lamps lit the roads. A new reservoir was built and the sewer systems were expanded. All this building took place when neighboring economies stayed stagnant. Bridges, new houses, even a ski jump was financed with this rotting currency. The French Prime Minister went to see this miracle in person, and eventually 170 neighboring townships wanted to adopt this new form of money. But a lawsuit from the Austrian Central Bank quickly brought this experiment to a close. The town's unemployment rate returned to their original levels. Poverty amid plenty resumed. A couple years later, when Hitler annexed the country, he was welcomed as a needed political and economic savior. The aim of those most affected by the spirit of this time seems very drawn to the interest-bearing nature of our current money. Instead of relying on the process that guides their personal interest, They prefer perpetual steady returns. Salvation seems to be some strange amalgam of get enough money to live off its infinite interest, plus technological progress equals heaven on earth is life without work or toil.
Thing I've tried to put a priority on since I left the White House was, getting some exercise in. I think that there's a good probability that my generation is, hopefully with the advances in science, either, the first generation to live forever or the last generation that's going to die. And so we need to keep ourselves in pretty good shape.
The aim of this age is to escape being human, to transcend humanity. Young and non-bricking Peterson wanted the opposite, to fully embrace the human, to sink into it. The golden thread of interest, Peterson argues, is the process that leads a person to becoming more human. If faith is not in this guide, capable of seeing beyond the theories of the intellect, the will of the intellect will become total, so total that trying to live forever as a robot is thought to be rational. When a theory or culture dies, when a ruling idea comes to an end, as they always do, the intellect then has no pillars or axioms to start reasoning from. It can only flounder around in doubt, forever.
Question then is, what guides you in the realm of doubt?
Yeah.
What is there that guides you in the realm of doubt? The proclamation of the intellect would be something like, well, there can be nothing that guides you in the realm of doubt because you don't know what you're doing. So if the intellect is the guide, you're lost. Yeah. Especially in my current circumstances.
Yeah.
I'm the most confused person I've ever met. I would say.
Yeah.
And I've met some pretty confused people, so.
The title of the final chapter in Maps of Meaning is The Divinity of Interest. He has defined and made explicit the one thing that could help him. In other words, he's turned the process that rectifies bricking into a brick.
Not just explicit. The left hemisphere sees what's on the surface obvious. The right hemisphere sees what you see by reading between the lines. And for us, everything important, I would say, everything important needs to remain implicit if it's not to become degraded. For example, if you try to explain love in words to somebody who's never had it, you can't do it. Friendship, religious faith, awe before the beauty of nature, poetry, drama, music, architecture, myth, ritual, narrative, all these things can be made explicit, but in doing so they crash. They can become something that's just nothing like the original.
They can brick. Floundering around in doubt leaves its toll.
So extreme that it sends their body into a physiological state that's basically unbearable, and that does them in. And when you start to understand what having your preconceptions rattled really means, then you also start to understand why people are so motivated to protect their ideological territory, right? Because ideological territory, that's how you see the world. That's your story. And you can't have your fundaments rattled all the time because it throws everything into chaos, and that puts you in this terrible, panicky, cortisol-ridden, stressful state that's really hard on you physically. So we know, for example, that if you're in a state where you're chronically exposed to threat or punishment, which is the case in depression, say, you produce a lot of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and cortisol is toxic. So the more of it you produce, the more you kill off your hippocampal cells, and you really need them because they're key to memory. You do in your immunological system. There's all sorts of negative side effects of cortisol poisoning, increased incidence of cardiovascular disease, heightened rate of cancer. Plus, it's just no fun, right? It's the worst thing that can possibly happen to you, essentially.
This proclivity I had for depression seemed to have become untreatable, and that took me out. And I'm still struggling with that. I get up. I can hardly stand up when I wake up in the morning. I feel so bad. I can't believe I can be alive and feel that bad. I stumble downstairs and I'm in the sauna for about an hour and a half, and then I can stand up long enough to have a shower, which I do for about 20 minutes, and I scrub myself from top to bottom trying to wake up. And then I can more or less get upstairs and I eat, and then I walk like 10 miles every day because I need to do that in order to deal with this, whatever it is that's plaguing me. And I can get myself to the point where by this time in the afternoon, I'm more or less functional, but then it repeats the next day. And it's so...
My God, that's terrible.
Jordan suffers so much because of his total and utter devotion to his life mission, which makes the whole thing kind of tragic.
As a consequence of our participation in an implicit or explicit religious structure. And what I want to do today in large part is lay bare the nature of that implicit religious structure and then relate it explicitly to models of neuropsychological functioning. And I hope by the end of the lecture that I'll have provided you with a framework that will allow you to understand in a more rich manner many of the things that you've heard at this conference, but that I'll also lead you to a place where you actually will believe, at least in part, that that title might represent something that's more than merely a form of kind of high comedy.
The title of the talk was The Neuropsychological Model of Why You Might Be Christ. Jordan's way of saying humans aren't just walking, talking, dead matter. Jordan would call bricking domination of the tyrannical father or domination of the left hemisphere. Bricking is a state of the nervous system. When a false or subsidiary goal is aimed at, things will start to brick. A shot bricks when the shooter focuses on replicating an aspect of form more so than shooting an active living shot. Jordan bricks when he prioritizes making this religious structure explicit and rational over enabling a deeper understanding for others. Society bricks because we're more focused on progressing technology and steady returns than humans. Would adopting this perishable form of money fix society? No. But money, as Sylvia Gassel says, is the nervous system of economic life, and making money a little more fluid and flexible, connecting it back to nature, could help. If adopting this form of money lessened people's infatuation with money's ability to generate interest, I think that would be a good thing. People might be more willing to look outside the current confines of society if the goal of that society was disrupted, maybe making them open to a different understanding. Healthy Jordan thought people had to understand this if we were to move forward.
Look, you need the social world because it protects you, but it also crushes you, and it's blind and stupid, so it needs you, because you have to act at the edges of the social world and constantly update it. It's a nice, paradoxical, mutual relationship. Well, you need chaos too, and this is Dostoevsky's example. You know, think if there was a utopia, everything's perfect. You don't have to do anything. There's no challenges left to overcome. There's no novelty to reveal itself. Well, paradise for human beings is process and not state. We like to be involved and engaged in something we consider meaningful and important. We don't want to be at the end point of the journey. No one's more satisfied when a symphony is over than when it's playing. Paradise for us is a paradise of process, and that's identification with logos. Well, what happens if you refuse courageous identification with this spirit? Well, it's simple. It's your creative capacity and your exploratory courage that allows you to extract information from the world. You need that information to build your character. You need to build your character because life is hard. It's tragic. It's tragic because we're vulnerable. And if you don't take full advantage of everything the world offers you in terms of information, you'll make yourself weak. So every time you shy away from something you should explore, every time you shy away from your own intrinsic sense of meaning, you weaken your own personality. Literally. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean you weaken it. Well, what do weak people need? Well, they need strength. Weak people need totalitarian belief systems. They hide inside them like a turtle who won't put out its head hides inside a shell. And that means that individual cowardice and refusal to advance courageously into the unknown is the process that pathologizes social structure. And what that implies is something very much like religious traditions have always said, which is, in some weird way, you're the center of the world. Well, how about you construe that rationally? Think of a neural network. Mathematical demonstrations in the 1980s. You are connected to every single person in North America by a maximum of 4 intermediaries. You think that you're one mote among 6 billion, but you're not. You're at the center of a very interactive network. And everything you do, whether you know it or not, has a far greater effect than you can immediately see. So every cowardly decision that you take, cowardly defined on your own grounds, by the way, tilts the whole network towards a kind of chaos or pathological order. And every time you advance courageously and exist as an exemplar of appropriate being, then you improve the functioning of the entire unit. And that means that in a paradoxical way, as I said before, everybody can be reasonably construed as an embodiment of Christ. Well, you could say as well that there's a terribly negative aspect of that as well, which is that the alternative to that is to be an embodiment of the process that exists precisely in opposition to that. And it seemed to me, after thinking about it for many years, that The drama that we were playing out in the 1980s was precisely that. We were going to turn the world into something as close to hell as we could possibly imagine, or collectively, as individuals, we're going to keep the whole ball rolling and allow existence to continue to reveal itself despite its tragic nature as a consequence of participating voluntarily in this creative and courageous process. That's all I have to say.
I say banned, although technically I have been suspended. But the suspension will not be lifted unless I delete the hateful tweet in question, and I would rather die than do that. I should at least know exactly what I did wrong if I am required to acknowledge that my tweet violated the Twitter rules. What rules, you sons of bitches? Were those male breasts or female breasts that were removed? And I'm not taking down that tweet or acknowledging that my tweet violated the Twitter rules. Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.